Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas, on Friday, February the 21st, and welcome to our commentary. Well, I want to begin congratulating Canada for winning that game last night. That was a great game. Now, most of those guys are NHL players, so these are not youngsters or anything like that. These are professionals who are on that ice. Some of the best players in the planet, in this case representing Canada in the United States. It was a great game. The Canadians are very good at hockey. It was a great game to watch, and just congratulations to Canada. And that's about all I can say about this hockey game. There's not much else you can say other than I think if you were watching the game on TV or if you have had tickets to the game or whatever, that you got to see a very good game. So congratulations to the Canadians for winning. And I don't know how they came up with this particular four-game or four-country tournament in the middle of the season. I'm not sure how they came up with that. I think that's something new, and I don't know whether they're going to do it every year or not. But I tell you, it certainly created a lot of interest here in the United States. I haven't seen that much interest in a hockey game in quite some time. You almost have to go back to that USSR game. By the way, I have a post about that coming out tomorrow because tomorrow is the anniversary of that incredible game back in 1980. But one more time, congratulations to Canada, and congratulations to the guys from the U.S. because they did a great job too. That game was just back and forth, back and forth. Great defense, 3-2 game. Great game to watch. I'll just put it. I'll just put it that way. Some quick things that I wanted to get to. Kash Patel is now the director of the FBI. He was just sworn in this afternoon. I saw the ceremony. He has a beautiful wife, by the way. I had not seen his wife and family before, but a beautiful family. So congratulations to the Patel family. So we now have this is interesting to me. We now have a director of the FBI named Patel, a Secretary of State named Rubio, a Secretary of Treasury who is gay, and people are talking about diversity. This party has a diversity issue, or the Trump administration has a diversity issue, and I mean there's others too. With the first woman chief of staff, a woman attorney general, and people talk about diversity. I mean, I think that's pretty good diversity, but better than diversity, these are very talented people that he's put on that team. I just saw during the ceremony for Patel, or before the ceremony for Patel, I saw the Secretary of Commerce, who I didn't know much about. But during that, I mean, the guy's brilliant by just watching him. And not only in the ceremony, but even before that, when he was in front of the Senate, the man is brilliant. And something came up during that session about the post office, because it looks like the White House is looking at the post office and looking at reforms. And I think that's exactly the right thing to do. By the way, you've got to reform the post office. I like the idea of getting my letters. Everybody does, I guess. But it is getting to the point right now where the post office is losing so much money that I think it's time to take a look at it and see what we can do with it to make it better. You're still going to have registered letters, and you're still going to have, certain communications that will be done by the post office. But in general, how many letters do you write? How many? I mean, I look at my mail every day, and even bills, people don't get that many bills anymore because we pay everything online. So if you pay it online, you don't get the paper bill. In fact, most companies will ask you, do you want to do paperless billing? So, I mean, more and more Americans, I think, are using less and less of the post office. And that's why they're losing money. They just don't have the same demand that they used to have. And yes, there are packages that people send, you can keep that. And of course, registered letters are always going to be a part of the post office. But, the idea of the post office has to be reformed. And that kind of came up during the ceremony for the new Secretary of Commerce. So I was very impressed with him to to say the least. And one more thing that keeps coming up is this situation between the president of Ukraine and President Trump, and I guess they've been going back and forth. Now, I was watching Secretary Rubio, and he was saying that apparently he and someone had I'm not sure if he said the vice president or somebody else, had a meeting with Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, and he didn't show up or something like that. Look, my feeling about the Ukraine war, and I said this from the very beginning, I think it was wrong, completely wrong and lawless for Putin to go in there, had no business going in there. I do agree, by the way, with President Trump that this would have never happened if he was president, because it would have been a completely different international situation. But, it happened. He went in. I thought that Putin was lawless and horrible in going in. But we have now reached a point where, and by the way, I do salute the bravery of the soldiers of Ukraine. They fought very valiantly, and nobody takes that away from them. But I think we have reached the point where the only solution is a diplomatic solution. There's not going to be a military solution. And if there is more military fighting or more fighting, it benefits Russia because they have more people they can lose. Let's just face it, they're much bigger. They have more soldiers. And they have a leader named Putin who he doesn't care about soldiers dying. He's already lost, I read the other day, 100,000 soldiers. That's an awesome figure. If you just think about that figure, 100,000 soldiers. Think about Vietnam, Korea, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Those 4 wars. We didn't lose 100,000 soldiers. We lost 60 in Vietnam, 40 or 30 something in Korea, and then 4 in Iraq and 4 in Afghanistan. So roughly, let's just say 100,000. But that was over 4 wars, over 6-7 decades. And here the Russians have lost that many people in a couple of years. So this has been a very tough war for the Russians. And I don't even know the figures from Ukraine. I'm sure Ukraine has had pretty severe losses too. When you see these videos of cities and buildings and all of that, it's deadly what's going on in that war. So I think it should end. I think the war should end. I think Trump's got the right idea. Let's bring these people together and cut a deal. We got to cut a deal and try to at least stop the fighting, because this is not going anywhere. And we've invested $300 billion, and I'm not even sure where that money went. So there has to be a deal to finish this thing. And I think Trump can do it, but I just don't, honestly, I don't know why Trump is being criticized on this, because he's trying to cut a deal. And in order to cut a deal, you sometimes have to say things about the parties to make it happen. So I think Trump's going to do it, and I think Trump's right that this war has to end. I just don't see any other way of going forward. This war has to end. There's simply no other way of going forward. You even had North Korean soldiers fighting on the Russian side. I think they sent 10,000 soldiers. And I don't even know where those soldiers are anymore. Some of them, I understand that a lot of them had been killed because they weren't really ready for war. So it's just been a deadly exercise over there. And, I think it's got to end. It's got to end. And I trust that Trump will make it end. Well, let me leave you with a little history. I have a post over at the American Thinker today reminding everybody that it was 53 years ago today. That's a long time. 53 years ago today, 1972, that President Nixon, Air Force One, landed in China. And I remember that watching it on TV with my parents. And, a lot of people didn't understand what Nixon was doing, because Nixon was the anti-communist. And the last person in the world that would have gone to China and tried to make friends with the Chinese would have been Nixon, because, as I say, his whole career had been a very strong anti-communist. For example, just to give you a little tidbit, when Fidel Castro, in April of 1959, went to Washington, D.C., he met with then Vice President Nixon. And Vice President Nixon had some remarks that turned out to be prophetic. he said, this guy is either a communist or he's very naive. So Nixon was always known as the anti-communist. So the fact that he would be the one going to China caught a lot of people by surprise. And, I remember the scenes on television, the president and the first lady walking around, the Great Wall of China. And I remember the pictures on TV of bicycles, and everybody would dress the same. I remember my mother pointing that out. We were watching these videos coming, or these reports coming from China, and my mother said in Spanish, all these people dress the same, which is true. Everybody had the same little brown outfits that everybody was wearing back then. It was just a totally different country than what it is now. So that visit by President Nixon, opened up China. And now we are where we are. And, I guess a lot of people are asking, was it the right thing to do, the wrong thing to do? I think, on balance, I think Nixon did the right thing, because China was going to grow one way or the other. And, I think the expectation was that if we, bring more business to China, or, create more prosperity in China, that was going to make them maybe more democratic. It really hasn't. But China is China. And sometimes, when you look at the expansion of China into Latin American infrastructure, you wonder if Nixon did the right thing or not. But it's over 53 years ago that it happened. And the reality is what it is. And now we got to deal with China at a different level than we were back then. But it happened 53 years ago today. And as I write in my post over at the American Thinker, the amazing thing about the visit, beyond the visit itself and the consequences that it had, was how it came together. How it came together is amazing. It was all done in secret. Nobody had a clue that Henry Kissinger was negotiating with the Chinese. Kissinger at the time was the National Security Advisor, not the Secretary of State. And he was the one who was doing all the negotiating with the Chinese. And it was all being done in private. And it was being done through, the Romanian embassy, I guess, and other embassies around the world. And all these meetings were being done in private, setting up the visit by President Nixon. And President Nixon announced it in the summer of 71, and then the trip took place in February of 1972. But it was all done in secret. And if you read, as I mentioned in my post, if you read Richard Nixon's biography, which is a great book, by the way, if you read his biography, it's called RN, that's the name of the book. It's a two-part book. And if you read that book, as I did a few years ago, you realize how important it was to the mission that it was kept secret. Because had there been a leak along the way, the whole thing would have fallen apart. Because the Chinese, were working with Kissinger, but they didn't want anybody to know it. So fascinating moment in history. 53 years ago today, President Richard Nixon and First Lady Nixon landed in China. And if you look at the video, you'll notice one thing about Air Force One. It was the 707 version, not the new 747 version that we see now. I think it was the old one, the same one that flew Kennedy to Dallas in 1963, I believe. But there was Nixon coming down the stairs and saluting the prime minister, I guess, of China at the time, and having tea with Mao. And that was, pretty historic back then. And it was happening in the middle of an election. That was, I guess, what made it even more interesting. Nixon was running for re-election that year, so it worked out real well for President Nixon that year. So anyway, Nixon in China, one of the most interesting moments 53 years ago today. And check out my post over at the American Thinker for a little bit more background on the story. Thank you for listening. Have a great weekend. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas.